like to welcome everybody to our webinar today, and we're so excited that you're able to join us today as we spend time talking about managing our mental health during COVID-19. And we're excited that all of you are able to join us today and to participate in this webinar. And the response have been absolutely overwhelming, with all the people who wanted to be present and learn about mental health and learn about how to manage the challenges you're facing during this really difficult time for all of us. And so we're excited that you found the time in your schedule. I know for some of you, it's probably almost bedtime for you and your children and your families. So we appreciate that you found the time on your schedule to join us today. And so I just want to share a couple of things before we jump into the webinar. My name is Dr. Lilian Odera. Most people call me Dr. Lil. And the purpose of this webinar is really to raise awareness about mental health among African people, both in the continent and in the diaspora. As we know, there's a mental health crisis growing among African people. And they, both here in the US, where some of us are, and in the diaspora, and we're dealing with the same issues that people are dealing with, across the world, people of other cultures, people of other nationalities, people from all parts of the world. But what I have noticed is that a lot of us are reluctant most of the time to seek help. And that could be because of different reasons, whether it's cultural barriers that exist, whether it's because of the stigma that exists about mental health seeking behavior. But the bottom line is we don't live up to what other people from other cultures, especially Western cultures, in terms of help seeking behavior. We're not exempt from the challenges that people face. And so I decided to step into this space and bring some awareness and also destigmatize mental health and mental illness, not just mental health, but mental illness, as far as our ability to be able to seek help and address the issues we face. I have been in situations where, you're the person who responds after there's been a crisis in the community, after there's been a significant issue that maybe we could have addressed if we never just, waited and ignored it or didn't acknowledge it. And so I'm excited that we are able to do these webinars and have time to just talk about what's going on in our community. I want people to be able to be equipped to know how to identify when you're struggling or somebody around you is struggling with mental health issues, for us to know, what do we do? How do we bring it up? And where and how do we seek help? And so I would like to involve the village, especially those with credibility in the community. And I'm talking about ministers, teachers, leaders, sheikhs, to destigmatize mental health. These people have the power and they have influence among us to encourage us to seek help and to seek support from those who are equipped to do so. So this is our second webinar. We had one last month, and the focus for this session is going to be dealing with grief, loss, building resilience, and finding purpose, even during a time such as this, when all of us are impacted by COVID-19. We have a Facebook page that we have created promoting African mental health. That is new, and we ask that if you would like to join the group, if you're interested, you can send me a message and I will add you on there. If you're a mental health provider on the webinar right now, you can send me a personal message and I can connect you with other providers. The webinar is being recorded and will be available a few days after this session on my YouTube channel. I think I'm having some glitches with the live stream. I don't know if that's related to the internet connection, but it will be available at a later date if you'd like to do so. All right. So we're going to go straight on into our presentations today, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker for today. And so our first speaker today is Reverend John Opiyo. So Chaplain John, Reverend John Opiyo is an ordained and licensed Baptist minister and is a founding pastor of Kahawa Sukari Baptist, Nairobi. Graduated with a Master of Divinity and a Master of Christian Education. He completed his year-long clinical pastoral education residency training at Harris Methodist Hospital of Fort Worth and went ahead and pursued a second residency at the Methodist Health System in Dallas, Texas. After that, he went ahead, this man does not stop. He then completed the 3-year ACPE fellowship program, better known as supervisory training, at the Children's Medical Center of Dallas, and he is a certified full supervisor.
It's a privilege to speak to you all. It's a joy to speak to my fellow brothers and sisters and fellow Kenyans. It's a joy always to speak about a subject that is very important and dear to me. Grief. I deal with grief every day because it's part of my job at the hospital. I work at a hospital that is similar to Kenyatta Hospital of Nairobi. So I work with public, I work with people who have insurance, people who don't have insurance, people who are here illegally. I work with people who have money, people who don't have money. And I hope you can all hear me. Okay, good. And so I call my place of work the checkpoint. For those that remember Safari Rally, the old Safari Rally in Kenya, the checkpoint of life where people stop and reflect and ask themselves, what's the most important thing in life? Because we live our life, we do everything, and then something comes to a standstill, maybe a new diagnosis, maybe an accident, maybe something has happened drastically, we are losing someone is about to die, and so there's crisis. So we deal with grief every day. So in my work, grief has two sides. The one side of grief has got to do with potential death of a future story. If there's a potential death of my future story, there is grief. Of potential death of a future story with my family members or friends, there is grief. The second element is separation. When there's an element of separation, there is grief. Therefore, that's why sometimes there's mixed emotions during marriage, a wedding. People are very tense because there's a type of death going on in a marriage. There's a type of death going on in retirement. And so there's a lot of tension. Now with COVID, something has died. What has died? The normal way we used to live, the freedom we used to have. And so we are facing four things. The four things we're facing in COVID are aloneness. Am I going through this by myself? Are we just isolated because of us? And then the second thing we're going through is freedom. Do I have freedom to live my life the way I've always known it? Am I free to do what I've always enjoyed? And the third thing that we're facing is meaning. Is there meaning to all this COVID? Is there something meaningful that will come out of this? Or is it just a happenstance? Is the creator involved? Does he have any intentions, etc.? And then the last thing that we're facing with this COVID is death. Death, physical, spiritual, emotional, social death, as in there are some friendships that are gonna die because of this COVID. There are going to be all kinds of death going on, death of assumptions. I used to think that money is everything, but now I'm realizing money is not everything because of COVID. That's a form of a death. And so those deaths, those four things are the things we are facing right now. And we deal with this every single day in the hospital when the doctors call me in or call other chaplains to come in and talk to a patient. And the four things are the things we look at. Is it aloneness? Is it freedom? Is it meaning? Is it death? And then we go into what is common amongst us as human beings. Suffering doesn't know gender. It doesn't know male or female. Suffering doesn't know religion. Suffering doesn't know political party. Suffering doesn't, this is our basic humanity. And so as Africans, there are some things that we do well. In fact, when I was being trained, I was asked, what's the difference between an African and any other person around the world? And I was stumped because I was like, how do you really tell who an African is? And I had to consult with a professor of African religious studies from Nazarene University. And he told me there are 3 things about being an African, 3 things. Number 1, an African is very, very communal. We are notoriously communal. We create community out of no place. We find somebody we become very committed to. So we are very communal people. Number 2, we are very compassionate people. Compassionate in what sense? When we had 9/11 in America, there are Maasais who said we are going to donate our cows to those people who lost their lives or lost their families in New York City. They didn't think about how do we take those cows to New York City. No, they're just moved with compassion. We are moved with compassion as a people. And the third thing that is very known about an African is continuity. We always want something to continue. And that's why death for us is not a full stop. It's not a period. Death for us is a comma. And so to talk about life after death is very, very common for an African. So we want continuity. When a child moves from a child to a young man, we want a ritual to recognize that. When a man moves to an elderly stage, we need a ritual. Now, how do you combine that with faith? Oh my goodness, there's a lot of connections with the faith. The things we believe concerning, for some of us who ascribe to Christianity, there are lots of opportunities to connect to that. There's opportunity for continuity. Like in my hospital, when a patient is facing death, they're thinking of a period. And I have to use my Africanness to say, how about if we think of it as a comma? What would you like people to remember you of? Let's do life review. So we do life review. So for that reason, I'm going to say, because of time, I'm going to give you some practical things that you can do because our time is very limited. COVID, what are some things that we can do with our families? Number 1, we need to remember that we can make the most of this season. What season? The season of being confined. We're confined. So what do we do when we're confined? When my patients are confined to the hospital, I do what we call life review. I tell them, have you told your story the way you want your story told? And they ask me, what do you mean? Do you have photo albums? No. Okay, can I see your photo albums? So we look at the photo albums and they start talking about their story. They want to talk about their story. And so recently, when we were confined here, and I found my son wandering around, wondering what to do, I asked him, son, have you done a genogram? And he asked me, what is that? A family tree. So we went on a project of drawing a family tree. Do you know who your grandfather is? Do you know who your great-great-grandfather is? Let me tell you some funny stories about him. Let me tell you why is it that you like engineering? And he got so excited, and it became a good project that not only invited him, but also invited a sister. My daughter is studying, she's studying financial management or wealth management, okay? Now, where did she get that idea? She thinks it just originally came until I introduced her to her grandfather, whom she never met, my father, who was an accountant with Kenya Railways. He was an accountant with Kenya Railways. They never met. How did this passed on from grandfather to grandchild? Because there's something going on in the family tree. So we call genogram. The studying of, you can use the time to study your family tree and find some great blessings on your family tree. Number 2, the second thing you can do, you can use this time to do board games. Some people like to play board games. I discovered there's a competitive spirit with my middle child. Very, very competitive spirit. So when we play cards, if she doesn't win, it's going to be something else. And she's always looking for ways to make business. And I said, now you are really Wanjiko. You are a real Wanjiko. You really like to make business out of all this. So it's very funny. We laugh, but it's a fantastic time. So the third thing that we also do is we'll read a favorite book. In high school, there's a book we read in high school called Miguel Street. Some of you may have heard of it, others have not heard of it. If you've not heard of that book, Miguel Street, I would recommend look for it. It's one of the funniest books that I've ever read with a family. Why is it funny? It's a story of a man who grew up in the ghettos of Trinidad and Tobago. Sort of like growing up in Madari, and you're a child trying to tell your story from a child's perspective of the adults living in Madari. So for that reason, it became very, very exciting to read that story and hear how this child tells the story, and it's very funny. The last thing I want to say is you can use the time when you get a chance to go outside to do a walk. There's a walk that my wife and I like to do every other evening, just the two of us. And when we do the walk, we always start with a story. Remember when? Remember when? And in the process of remembering when, we go back to, you remember the time when we didn't have money? You remember that time when we first came to America and we didn't have a mattress and you were pregnant and you could not even get up from the ground, you were sleeping on the ground. You remember how we went and found this mattress that somebody had thrown away, and we took it and we brought it in, and your back was hurting so bad that we threw it again because we were so poor. Now, those stories are very exciting to remember, help us remember where we came from and where we're going. There are many other things that you can do. We've read stories from the scriptures. We even asked ourselves, how did Noah, this man Noah, how did they stay? You know, they stayed in the ark for 150 days, which is 5 months. Here we are, COVID, we barely stayed 2 months. How did these people stay up? How did they stay that long, 5 months without killing each other? And so we start talking about that, and it becomes very exciting hearing what the children are talking about and realizing how blessed we are and how we can make the most. And then we discover a lot about each other. There are things we're discovering. And as I said in my PowerPoint presentation, we have a saying in Luo, because I'm a Luo. I'm a Luo by birth, okay? And I'm a Kikuyu by marriage, but I'm a Luo by birth. So by birth, we have a Luo saying which says, fish and guests smell in 3 days. Fish and guests smell in 3 days, meaning we discover the wrong things of our relatives and friends. In 3 days, we discover, oh, you have bad breath. I didn't know, man, the toes, the nails of your toes are terrible. We begin to see all the wrong things that are going on in our family members' life. So all that to say, these are the times that we can make the most and discover a lot about each other and the things we like about each other as a family. And that's all I want to say for now as an introduction.
Thank you so much, Reverend Opiyo, for such wisdom that you've shared about, and especially experiential of the things that you're doing with your family, the things that you're engaging in right now. I know we've had conversations about, you know, how do you engage, especially the young adults in the home who get restless and they want to get out and they're used to just having the liberty to do what they want. And actually we got a lot of questions. I just want to say I received hundreds of questions from all of you that I would just point out that it's not possible to respond to all those questions individually. And so we have clustered them into different categories and see if we can be able to respond to as many of them as we can. But I'm mindful that a lot of you have children in your homes and you're just at a loss. After a week or two, you're thinking, now what do I do with them? How do I get them engaged? How do I keep them motivated? And I'm getting a lot of messages from young adults saying, I need to get out of this house. I need to find an outlet. And as a parent, you have to get creative. You know, culturally, and Reverend Opiyo, and I purposely brought dads into the conversation because I wanted to hear their perspective. You know, we are probably culturally not socialized to have social connections with our children, to attend to their emotional needs as pertains to us, and our emotional needs as pertains to them. So a lot of times, you know, if you can, you know, I know being raised in a place where your relationship, especially with the men in your life, whether it's your father or your grandfather, was about your grades. You know, it was about your report card when you came home. That was your point of contact for connecting. You know, so what are you going to study? I still remember when I finished my doctorate and I went and I told my dad, you know, I'm done. And one of the things he wanted to know was, so what's next? So are you going into a faculty position? So who's going to mentor you? Are you writing a fellowship to go and do research? And as an African man, that's how they knew how to relate with us. And I just wanted a hug. I just wanted him to say, good job, baby girl. You know, you did good. You did awesome. But because our father's generation were also socialized to connect around performance. I'm seeing some heads shaking, you know, around excellence, academic excellence. So your identity from a parental perspective was about academic excellence. And so now COVID comes and you're in the house with all these kids and with all these people, and you can't keep asking about their grades every day. You have to find a way to connect. So I want us to move to our next speaker today. I'm excited to have this woman of God on today. So Pastor Mueni decides on their mental health. Pastor Mueni is a certified mediator. She's skilled in arbitration and conflict resolution. And for 5 years, she has served as an assistant pastor at Nairobi Baptist Church, where she's been an integral member of a team that ministers to families, couples, women, especially with life transitional issues. And an exciting thing is in 2018, Pastor Mueni launched The Well, which is an innovative program that brings healing and clarity to those who've gone through divorce and separation and difficult family situations. And so far, there's been 3 seasons. With season 4 of The Well is scheduled to start next month in June. So in the aftermath also of the terrorist attack in 2019, she conducted a series of trainings on trauma awareness, resiliency for survivors, for families and communities that were affected by that attack. And in partnership with the Bar Hostess Empowerment and Self-Help Program, she's tailored this program for commercial sex workers in the slums and informal settlements. So to date, she has actually trained over 50 women. And that is just impressive with all the things she has on her plate. So she's married and she's also a mother of 2 beautiful children. And I wanted to just throw in there that in response to COVID, an initiative called Share a Care Pack, where together with some other like-minded partners, they've been able to provide a care pack that consists of basic food, sanitary essentials for families that are in distress. I'm impressed by how much she's doing, and she's going to speak to us today, an extension of continuing to talk about grief and loss, how we deal with trauma and grief, and how that may be even impacting how we relate with each other. You know, how are we dealing with grief and loss in confinement? How are we able to grieve when we can't go to funerals, when we can't support each other? So I'm going to yield the floor to her right now. Pastor Mueni, are you there?
I am.
There you go. So you're on.
Good evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I see we have people from all ends of the earth, and that's amazing in itself to just have all of you here tonight. Yes, so thank you, Lilian, Dr. Lil. I mean, it's been exciting just preparing for this and getting to read about some of the people that are on this panel, and so what does grief look like? Grief is actually the normal and natural reaction to loss. Life is about transitions. Like what Reverend Opiyo said. Life has transitions. Now there are 3 kinds of transitions in life. There are transitions that are because of the natural flow of life. You give birth to a child. Within a couple of years, they will be a teenager. Within a couple of years, they'll be a young adult. And that doesn't matter, because as long as life flows. So in 2020, whether we are washing, all we did in 2020 was wash our hands and buy tissue. We will still be older in 2021. And because the normal progression of life brings transitions. The second kind of transitions that we have to deal with are transitions that are a result of choice. The rest of my panelists and my host all made a choice at one point in life to relocate from Kenya to the US. And they have been, and we, as all of us tonight, are a result of the choices that we have made or not made within the course of life. So the second transition is brought on because of choice. The third transition is the transition that life thrusts upon you. You are busy minding the rest of your business, your life is going on, and then just like that, life changes. And I think in this COVID season, we're feeling like we've been thrust into something. Now, the situation is what is not normal. Our feelings, our emotions are normal and they are natural. And so grief is about the conflicting feelings that come at the end, that come with the change of a pattern or the end of a familiar, and they are conflicting because we have, for instance, you could have freedom and fear. We could have relief and pain, both as conflicting feelings, but then still feelings that arise out as a result of change. And I'm going to ask Dr. Lil to share the slides at this point. So that will be the first slide that we are really essentially covering. Yeah. Now there are many losses that we go through as human beings, and the losses that we go through that impact the human heart are many. They say they are almost like maybe 42, and many of them we don't even think about. Some of them include what we call normal, moving from one house to another, transferring children from one school to another, moving countries, all those things. We don't consult sometimes even the children, but we just go on because this is better, we're moving on up, and so we transition, but yet we don't carry with us the people that are around us. And that causes grief among them. One of the biggest ones I learned as I was going through my training was that, we usually have this thing as Kenyans, we have this thing about having a child that we call our child in the old age. So you probably had your children in your 20s, your children in your 30s. Then as you get into your 40s, your 50s, you decide to have another child. So you find the age gap between the kids is about 10, 18, 15 years. Now those children go through grief. For me, that was quite an interesting thing to learn because it was normal. But then you begin to realize that these children grow up experiencing grief in their different stages because they don't know whether they're siblings. They don't know whether this other one is a parent. There's a bit of reconstructuring in the family that causes grief in the minds of both children. Can move on to the next slide. And then, so there are different types of grief. There are different types of grief that we experience, and I'll quickly go over the five main ones because that we are likely to experience in this season. The first one is anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief is grief that is grief that occurs because we are expecting something bad to happen. We are anticipating. And so we begin to do the grief work before something happens. For instance, when you have a sick one who's in hospital, and then you see the phone ringing from the hospital, you begin to think, could it be, has it, was it? And maybe they're just calling to tell you that your sick person slept well. But because you're anticipating grief, you have begun to do the grief work. You began to think, what will happen should this happen? The second grief that we may be experiencing in this season is ambiguous loss. Now, this may be a big one in this season because this is a loss that occurs without conclusion or understanding. Now, the thing about ambiguous loss is that you're left feeling there's a conclusion somewhere that needed to happen. There's a closure somewhere that needed to happen. And because that closure seems to not be happening, the not knowing is a bit confusing. So you find that the person may be psychologically present or but physically absent, or they may be psychologically absent but physically present. So in this season of COVID-19 and families are at home, you may find that our parents or even our children We are physically together at home, but we are not psychologically present. You may be a physically available, present parent, but psychologically you're in the office because you're working from home. You may be physically present, but psychologically you are thinking about the business that's struggling. So that loss can be a bit conflicting. Now, what also happens with the ambiguous loss is sometimes you find that you're frozen in grief. This is a grief that is so powerful that the person cannot move forward and does not know how to move forward after the grief. And this means this makes it that because of the ambiguity of it all, because of the not knowing around it all, you don't know whether to move forward. You really are lost. You really are confused in terms of how do I deal with what's going on. There's also what we're going to see as complicated grief. Complicated grief is grief that when grief does not progress as expected, or the duration is prolonged, or it dramatically interferes with our ability to function. I know Dr. Lila had given me a question and was asking about what happens with a person is still grieving after 2 years. What does that mean? What does that look like? Now, when you're looking at a person who's still grieving after 2 years, you need to ask yourself, how are they grieving? Are they unable to wake up and go to work? I think we've seen this, and it is how is the intensity of the grief after 2 years? Even after 2 months, even after 3 months, because every 3 months, the intensity should ideally, when grief progresses as expected, the intensity should be reducing. Now, if you've been to an African funeral, you probably have seen people fainting at the funeral. You know, the grief is so heavy, they faint. Now, if the person and the fainting is as a result of the intensity of the emotion, so the body shuts down to process that. Now, if the person is still fainting because of the intensity of the emotion, 6 years, 6 months down the line, a year down the line, then that grief is not going on too well. That you will need intervention to help with that grief. The other thing about complicated grief is that right now we're actually experiencing many losses, many losses. Maybe you have lost your job, your children are out of school, you therefore don't know how to get them back to school. It means then that you don't know how to pay your rent. You don't know, and then there's lockdown. So you can't even leave Nairobi and go to the safety of our country. So you find that there's too many griefs. And when this person sits down and they are crying, you're not sure what they are crying about. Even they are not able to actually say, I am crying because of the job. They may be crying because of the job. They may be crying because of the child. They may be crying because of the rent. They may be crying because they don't know where food is going to come from. So there are very many things that are at play that make the grief very complicated. And then we have grief that we call disenfranchised. This is grief that cannot be acknowledged openly, or either the griever is not acknowledged or the grief is not acknowledged because of the relationship. Now, it is important to mention at this point that we do not grieve over titles. We grieve over relationships. So I may have a colleague in the office who is truly closer than a brother to me. And then I may have my mother's neighbor's brother's cousin, who there's some blood relationship down the line, you know, the way we do, we Africans, and when that person passes on, I may not be able to have the intensity of the emotion as I would with my colleague. Because my colleague, it's been a relationship, we've shared a desk for the last 7 years, so I'm going to miss that. And the intensity of the grief over my colleague versus the intensity of the grief compared to this person that I have blood relation with may be different, but because we grieve over relationship and not over titles. So back to disenfranchised grief. This is grief that it is not socially acceptable to actually grieve over it. Yeah. So you may find that, for instance, If you're having a relation, a man is running an office and he has an extramarital relationship with his secretary. Now, should this man pass on, when the secretary comes to the home to pay her last respects, people will be wondering, she may faint because of the intensity of the relationship. People will be wondering, but she was just but a secretary. But you see, she's not there grieving as a secretary. She's actually there grieving a man she loved. So that conversation, the grief conversation for her is beyond title. It's about the relationship and what it was. Then we have vicarious grief. This is the grief that is basically known as a grief of being human. Right now we have the jogger that was killed in the US, and many of us are grieving over that because we are thinking he was just jogging, you know, and we feel the weight of the family and we feel the grief of the family. Thank you, Dr. Lin. We could go to the page that on how grief looks like, understanding grief. It is important to realize that grief is not linear. We want grief work to look like a straight line, like a continuum, but that's not how grief looks like. That is how grief actually works. It's a ball of emotions and they're all mixed up, and so grief is unique. Every individual will grieve differently. In fact, you may grieve differently over one family member, and then the next for another, you lose another family member, and the grief is going to be different because each grief situation is unique. Grief is not linear. We don't move from point A to point B to point C. Sometimes you can be stuck at one emotion for a while and then go back. And I know we've had about the 5 stages of grief, and that the 5 stages of grief are not a formula. They're actually just a framework to help us be able to understand what grief looks like. Because grief is not linear. Now, the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. Now, there is no formula that says you must move from one stage to another. You can be stuck at one stage or another. It is just a guideline to help us identify these emotions that I am feeling. This could be where I am at, and then the third thing is that grief is a healing process. Here is the paradox about grief. Grief, you cannot go over it, you cannot go around it. It's the one thing that you must go through it. You must allow yourself to feel the emotion so that you can actually get through it. And it's important to remember that grief is part of a continuum because where there is great grief, it's because there was great love. If you did not love richly, then you would not grieve deeply. So grief is actually a healing process because you get to a place where as you continue in that space, you begin to see how much you love and how much the loss feels deeply. Now, it is also important to realize that grief doesn't come to a closure. Grief doesn't end. It just changes from one season to another. It actually just you continue. You find that there are different emotions. You may find that there are different emotions depending on how the person died. So grief is a healing process, and sometimes it's a healing of a relationship that existed, a healing of a relationship that you hoped would be renewed. But so grief is a healing process. Grief can be very lonely because all these things are going on within you. So grief can be a very lonely process. And finally, grief is transformative. And how is grief transformative? Because as we go through grief, we change from one state to another. We move from the person that we were into a new person, from the person that lived with this person to a person that is now learning to live with the loss. From the person that woke up every day and this was my frame of mind to now another person. Now, that's because normal life is considered to be predictable. and orderly. Now grief shatters that, and then you begin to redefine what my normal life is and begin to find what we call a new norm. We can move on to the next slide. Now there are different reactions to how to how we respond to grief. We have physical reactions, we have emotional reactions, we have behavioral reactions, we have thinking reactions, and we also have spiritual reactions. Now, all these reactions begin to build up, and all these reactions begin to redefine us, especially the thinking, the behavioral, and the emotional reactions. They begin to redefine who we are. They begin we begin to redefine the world afresh. We begin to see that the world is changing, and so we begin to become different people. And you will notice that many times when people have gone through grief, there's sometimes it becomes a watershed period. So we are able to see Mwangi before grief and Mwangi after grief, and we're able to see clear-cut differences between the two different Mwangis. I'll request us to move to the next slide, which is the impact of grief on the family. And this helps us to look at what is the impact of grief right now in our families as a result of COVID-19. And there are many different reactions. We have the health, we have what is the current health situation. For instance, in a family, if you have someone who has been diagnosed positive with COVID-19, with the coronavirus, and then you have another person who has passed on as a result of COVID-19 complications, you will find that there will be a sense of anticipatory grief with regard to the person who is positive. So that begins to redefine the family and how they are gathering around this person. You begin to realize that even the relationship who has died or the thing that has been lost, if you invested all your life savings into a home and then you lose that home, that has a heavy impact on the home. The age of the person who's grieving. Sometimes you will hear older people saying, "Oh, it should have been me who died instead of the young child who died." So sometimes the age of the person begins to define how they grieve as a family. Previous experience of grief. How did they absorb the last grief? How did they process the last grief they went through? Cultural background. The other day we had a funeral that people felt, and we keep having funerals, even now in Kenya, that we are supposed to have only 15 people. And that is a shocker for many of us. How do I do a funeral with 15 people? How do we mourn for someone fully with only 15 people when all their classmates are not able to come? So there are cultural dimensions that are being shifted even at this time. The belief system that we hold, is there life after death? What happens when we die? What happens to the body? What happens to the soul? And that belief system begins to impact the grief on the family. Financial situation. If the person who has died is a breadwinner, how does that affect the family? Knowledge around the cause of death. We almost always want to know, how did they die? What was the thing that caused the death? And I find that very interesting, because it is interesting because we want to know how the person died, and yet the person's dying and how they died, the knowledge of how they died is not going to change the effect of the loss. But there are times where the knowledge of the cause of death has a bearing on the loss, on how the person, on the loss of the person. For instance, if someone is murdered, that is going to have an effect on complicating the grief of that family. And we have a lot of other impacts of grief on the family, and we will be sharing these notes later. And these are just things that we begin to see what happens when someone dies, especially in this season. I want us to go to the last slide, because the last slide is how do we find healthy COVID-19 coping mechanisms? How are we going to live in this season? How do we cope with all that's going on? The first thing I'll say is love. Love is going to help us cope in so many ways. Love yourself, and sometimes part of loving yourself is I will stay home if that's what it takes. Love your neighbor. Sometimes it means I will wear a mask. And those of you that are of the Christian persuasion, love covers a multitude of sins. And in this time when we are home with many of our loved ones, there's going to be lots of things that can irritate you or trigger you at home. And I know we've seen a lot of domestic violence in this season. But just speaking, we need to go back to the place of love, the place of what is love and how does that look like, and how do I want to live with the person that I'm living with? Because if you don't love, if you don't go back to that place, you can be so emotionally raw, and everything around the person around you will trigger you. Why is he blinking so loudly? Why is she breathing so much air? Is there an air shortage? And that just begins to trigger you. But it's not because he's blinking loudly or she's breathing loudly, but it's because we are all very emotionally raw right now. So love yourself and love your neighbor. The second thing to help us cope is identity. Our identity is being restructured. We are now beginning to find that your mother, your teacher, you've been a mother, now you're becoming the teacher. You're beginning to find that now maybe if I've identified myself only by what I do, now I'm going to, my work is going to need to be redefined. So your identity is going to need to be restructured. We need to look at our values. What are the things that we hold dear? What are the things that we believe in? What are our beliefs? What are our traditions? Why have we practiced them? How about we interrogate them at this time? We're also going to learn to live with in conclusion. Just to learn to accept uncertainty and the unpredictability of the situation. We had 21 days lockdown in Kenya. We had another 21 days. When the 21 days end, we don't know whether we're going to be able to go back to work. We don't know what's going to happen. And so you need to allow yourself the freedom to decide, if they do give us another 21 days, what's that going to look like? And then we need to start embracing a new normal. I've seen a couple of people saying that since they started wearing the masks as they go out to public, their reactions, their sinuses reactions have gone down. So maybe that's going to be a new normal as we go out. And the last thing that we need to learn to live is with gratitude. Gratitude for the little things, gratitude for the big things, gratitude for even just being able to wake up every day and be able to say, this is a brand new day, and what do I choose today? I choose to be alive. So thank you very much. I'm sure we'll interact more with questions thereafter. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Pastor Mwangi, for sharing, such valuable nuggets for us to take with us, even as we deal with grief. And, we are barely scratching the surface of some of these issues, with such extensive information we can share about dealing with grief. And I'm watching the chat box at some of the conversations that are going on in there. And I wish there was a manual to deal with grief. It's not as linear as we would like it. I wish it was just very clear how to grieve and how to find the right way to do it. We have all these cultural filters. We have all these spiritual filters. We have the subculture within your home that dictates whether are you allowed to cry. Some of you on this webinar today, maybe you've got messages saying, be a man, don't cry, big boys don't cry. And some of us maybe have been judged or treated a certain way because we decided that we needed to express. So there is no manual, but there's a line somewhere, you know, where you cross from it being healthy grieving to where you're not functional after a prolonged period of time. You're not getting out of bed. You're not able to take care of your kids. You're not observing hygiene. You are overly emotional all the time. Then that's probably the right time to say, I need to speak to somebody. There is a window when naturally as human beings, we are able to reset the loss. We're able to reset the ability to put one foot forward in front of the other. But some of us lack the skills to do that. We may have some pre-existing things that got in the way of us developing those skills. And perhaps it was because grief is not acknowledged, or the ability to invite your emotions into an experience is not acknowledged. And so it's different. I wish there was a 3-month window I could say you're done. However, when it gets to a point, and grief, it kind of ebbs away. There was a comment on the chat box. Time does not heal those wounds necessarily, because sometimes time means you just put a pose on it and you just don't touch it. You put it in a box and you put it in your attic. And then something comes along that triggers it. And then you realize, whoa, I never dealt with this thing at all. But those of you who have had a loss of a relationship or something like that, and then you run into this person and suddenly, oh, that stuff comes back. Or somebody mentions the name of the person that you lost and you find your stuff coming back again. That's a sign that, you know what, I haven't dealt with this stuff. But we come from a culture where there's no space for us to have a conversation around it. So I'm encouraging everybody on this call, have some conversation about it. It may be difficult, especially for the older generation, to go and tell your mom, let's talk about this. I know I've had some losses in my life. Personally, I'm now disclosing quite a bit. And it took a while for me to go through some of that grief because there was no space for it. The adults found their way to grieve, but nobody thought about the children. And there were questions about how do we help children grieve? You know, sometimes like the American way a lot of times is we don't take the kids to the funerals. We leave them at home, we take them to a babysitter and we go to the funeral. Then the African way for some of us, it's the other extreme. Take the children to the gravesite and have them look into the hole. And they're 5. They don't have the language to process it. So we have to find a space somewhere. And it means that you who are listening to me, you need to learn the skills of how to grieve so you can help the people in your life how to grieve. So thank you for that presentation. I will be sharing this slides. For those of you, that's why it's important that people registered, because I will use your email to be able to share the slides. Pastor John had some slides as well that I would send to you, but I would have to do it via email. So if you're masquerading here and you didn't register, you will not be able to get the slides, but I will share this with everybody else when we are done. Pastor Mueni, you wanted to say something quickly before we transition?
Actually, someone had asked me about the slides, so I'm glad you covered it.
Great. So we're going to shift on to the next speaker. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit to our next speaker. So it's such an honor and a privilege for me to introduce to us Reverend Julius Sanna, who is my friend. They're all my friends. They're my people. I love these guys. But he is the Director of Outreach and Worship Ministries at the Trinity Delray Church in Delray Beach, Florida. He has been involved in church planting and youth ministries with the Church of the Nazarene for over 17 years. And he's a motivational speaker. He's a musician who is really active in the South Florida jazz scene. If you have not listened to him play, it's awesome. He and his wife, Julia, and Julia was one of our panelists last month, they founded Positively Africa, which is an organization that uses music, dance, and storytelling to educate communities in South Florida about the positive aspect of African life and culture. And I've actually seen them going to libraries, have time with children, elementary school kids, and have a positive experience with them. So Julius and Julia are blessed with 4 beautiful children. Let me see if I can get that right. Jude, Jordan, Joy, and Joanna. and they currently reside in West Palm Beach, Florida. I like to call them the JJ family. So he's going to speak to us about, you know, the power of resilience and finding purpose. You know, during this time when it's really hard to find purpose and be resilient, you know, as we go through COVID-19 and sheltering in place. But he's going to talk about things like leaning on faith, activating our faith. And he's a dad. So he's going to also talk to us about how to manage this season as an African dad with children who need emotional support, they need assurance, they need connection. You need to get Christmas out, Julius, and I take the kids to the water, you take them to the park, so you keep them engaged. And you know, as a dad, you're going to share some of how you get that done, because I believe you have a teen in that.
That's correct.
You have younger ones, you also have little ones, so you have the whole spectrum as well. So the floor is yours.
All righty, greetings to all of you. Greetings from Florida. I don't know what the weather is like on your end of the world, but it's perfect over here. Just wanted to let you know that this is an amazing forum. Thank you, Lilian, for inviting all of us to do this. This is so necessary. And it actually speaks to the fact that when we face different challenges in our lives, we can come up with new ways of doing things. This is part of resilience right here. Being able to use the internet, being able to use technology to do this. So thank you so much. I believe it's a blessing to all of us. I am the positive, always the glasses half full kind of guy. So I'm here to encourage us and to help us see the opportunities and how we can navigate through these difficult situations. We must accept that they're difficult situations, but we are able to navigate and get to the other side if we could just keep our focus in the right place. And so I'm so honored to be in the presence of people with a lot of knowledge and expertise on grief and loss and all the things that we have talked about. And those are very necessary topics to deal with when we're in this situation where people are actually dying. But I wanna focus, I wanna turn a corner a little bit and talk about how we can be resilient and how we can find purpose in this situation. And I would just wanna share a few pictures of my family. I know that Lilian already mentioned that we are raising a football team here at our house. We're currently homeschooling, as most of you are, if not all of us. We have a high schooler, we have a middle schooler, we have a pre-K, and we have a kindergartner in our house. So you can imagine how the house is like on school days where, you know, 4 computers going on at the same time, and just trying to get everything organized. And I must say that, you know, my wife and I working as a team has been quite a blessing to be able to go through this. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to do. So we are raising these 4 kids. I want to share some pictures with you just so you can have a perspective of what we're dealing with here at our household. Let's see here. All righty. Can we see that? Or is it coming through yet? You can see it? Okay, good. All right, so here is our family. All the kiddos have grown up a little bit, but that's Jude, Jordan, Joy, and Joanna. We live near the ocean, so we like to go to the beach and enjoy God's creation. And these are my the different areas of my life that I deal with. I have to lay this foundation so that I could kind of use it as a springboard to talk about resilience and purpose. So, you know, like Lilian said, I'm married to Julia, who was in the last meeting here. And we've been married, it's coming up to 20 years this year. Praise be to God. Oh, God has been good. And we met in 1996. So that's, you can add 4 years to that. And God has been gracious. But we're also raising 2 boys. We are raising 2 girls. And as Lilian said, I'm a pastor and a motivational speaker. We got involved in church planting for a while there. And we are serving our community in West Palm Beach in various ways. We are involved with the various ministries. We got involved with Habitat for Humanity. We like to get involved in our community and be part of what God is doing in our community. I'm also involved in music, as Lilian mentioned. I'm a musician, so the picture right there is my band, and we play around different restaurants and cultural festivals and things like that. So that has been a blessing. Now I bring this up to just show you that there's a lot that's going on in our lives right now. And before this whole thing happened, COVID-19, which was the great pause, God like pushed the pause button on all of us. And we were just like, you know, everybody had to stop for a moment there. So we have so many things going on. Now, as far as parenting is concerned, and I just want to quote here from Charles Osgood. It says, "Babies are more trouble than you think, but they are more wonderful." They're more trouble than you think. We all those who are parents, you can attest to this, that when raising kids is quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge. And as they grow up, the challenges are more complex. So we are raising these kids, and we thank God. And like I said, without a supportive wife, it would not even have been possible. So I'm going to go back here to my screen so you guys can see me as we go along here. So raising kids in this time that is so complicated is definitely a challenging thing. And one of the things I've learned, even after all these years of raising kids and being married and being in a relationship, is that kids need a lot of, this might sound like an obvious statement, but kids need our support. They need to know that we are there for them. And kids don't just learn from what we tell them. Kids learn from what we show them. The lessons are more caught than they are taught. And therefore, for example, if you're dealing with a situation where there's potential for a lot of stress, it doesn't matter what you tell your kids. You might tell them, oh, just let's go through this, everything is going to be all right. But it's very important for us to be able to demonstrate what it looks like to not be stressed and not be overwhelmed. So we have to demonstrate what we teach them. So for example, my 14-year-old, who is very reserved, So at first, when he was in middle school, 5th grade, 6th grade, I found it hard to, I was trying to find a way to connect with him. And then I found out that he loves to go to the gym. So I couldn't wait for him to be of age so that we could go to the gym together. So I remember the first time we went, it was just the two of us, and we are working out, sharing all the machines and stuff. And it opened up a beautiful, wonderful door for communication. We were talking about everything. He was asking me questions that he would probably not ask me when even the mother is around, questions about relationships with girls. They were aliens at that time to him. These are like strange human beings that he was discovering and interacting with in school. And so I had this wonderful opportunity to share with him how to navigate those changes that he was going through. So finding a way to connect with your children in very specific ways is very important. Now I say specific because every child is different. Now we have 4 varieties of kids in our household. The 4 of them are completely different. Jude, like I said, is very reserved, laid back. You have to kind of settle him down to get any information out of him. But I'm so glad, and thank God I found a way to connect with him. And that has been helpful even during this difficult time, COVID-19. How do you deal with not being able to see your friends weeks on end? And so we've been able to communicate that. I've been able to connect with him in that way. We have Jordan, who is 11 years old, and Jordan is absolutely completely different from his brother. He just loves to talk. He's a people person. He is very flamboyant, and sometimes it's difficult to tell when he's really stressed out. And sometimes you may have a kid in your household who has this personality. It's an upbeat. In fact, I must say he probably got that a lot from me. You know, he's this flamboyant, very excited personality. And so it's difficult to tell when he is stressed out. But it is then that this confinement that we're experiencing right now in our household has provided an opportunity for us to connect on a one-on-one basis. I can call him out, and I have all this time to connect with him on a one-on-one basis. And I found that that has been a very necessary aspect of helping him cope with what's going on. Now, the girls are little and they're both very different. You know, Joy is reserved like his older brother, and Joanna is like a combination of everybody in the world. He's just like one fireball, and she is something else. But we are learning that the kids are really, really dependent on our impact on their lives during this time. I was sharing with Lilian a few, just as we were preparing for this, that one thing I have found out as a very, very busy person, like I shared with you, I do 100 different things. And then COVID-19 happens. And then so the pause button was hit in my life. And I found myself in the house more often than I've ever found myself in the house. And what I found out is that I was unnecessarily busy. There were certain things, because I'm an African man, and because first of all, I'm a man, and then I'm an African man, is that I had this desire to provide the best for my family. And to me, in some way, and sometimes I found that going out there and doing what I have to do to bring the food to the table, to provide for the kids, is what I had to do. I thought that was the way to show the kids that I'm there for them, that I love them, that I'm there to provide for them. But I have found out, since we've been in this pause, that my kids need my presence. They need me there physically. They need me there to play with them in the front yard, in the backyard. They need me to take them out to the park. They need me to be there, not just to leave the house in the morning, work all day in the name of being able to provide for them. And I know some people are caught in situations where it's difficult and your work schedule is just crazy. But me personally, and maybe to help somebody out there, that sometimes you've got to reevaluate what it is that you're doing and how it's affecting your family relationships. So I am actually thankful for this situation where I am now aware, more aware than ever before, that my kids need and they do enjoy my physical presence in the household. And my girls, I've connected with them better than I did before this pause became active in our lives, that we had to just sit back and spend more time in our homes. So that has been a blessing. And I just want to say one thing. Now moving on into how do we deal with the discouraging news, the bombardment of discouraging negative news that is hitting us at this time. I must confess that one of the things I don't typically enjoy doing is watching the news. I listen to my NPR in the morning to get my summary, and then I'm done for the day. Now, it is obviously very important to stay in touch with what's going on, but I have found out there's limits and there's levels after which it becomes now just an accumulation of stressful negative news. And we know what your thoughts do to you, what you allow in your mind, what you allow to reside in your mind based on what you're taking in affects how you live your life. In other words, your thought affects your perspective on life, and your perspective affects your reality. So that now you are living based on what you've taken in, and if it's all negative, if it's all stress, then you will have a negative perspective on life and you will display it as you live. And guess what? The first people to suffer from your negative perspective are your family. And so I want to just go out there and encourage, parents and all of us as people who are living in these very unprecedented, difficult times, that we need to watch what is going into our minds, because it is what will affect how we see the world. There is hope out there. There is hope beyond what we are being presented with. And we have to be, that resilience that we need comes from what we take in. Now, as a pastor, I just want to share with you the power of faith in these difficult times that we are facing. Now, the enemy, the devil, the enemy has a way to repackage the information that you're taking in, and repackage that to really discourage you and bring doubt and fear. If you go back to the Old Testament, for those of us who read the word and you're familiar with the stories of the Old Testament, there's a story where the children of Israel are about to get into their promised land. And to make a long story short, Moses sends 12 spies to check out the promised land. When they come back, 10 of them come back with discouraging, very negative news. News that is based out of fear, and news that is surrounded with despair and discouragement. But there's 2 spies who come back with positive news, not because they're just positive thinkers, not just because they're optimistic. No, because they're coming out of a different perspective, which is a perspective of faith and knowing that the God they serve is able to give them the promised land. So we are on the verge of a lot of things in our lives. You may be on the verge of something, God doing something amazing in your life. And then COVID-19 happens, and then you are quarantined, and then maybe you lose your job, and maybe friends that you're depending, opportunities that were just about to happen in your life, they disappear overnight. And now you're left with how you're going to decide how to live your life beyond this. I want to encourage us to live not out of fear, but out of faith. Not out of a perspective of a worst case scenario, but continuing to believe that God can take you through your situation. And like I said before, I am not an expert on grief and loss, and I'm so glad we do have people who can speak to that. But just so I encourage you, sometimes we can live our lives with this negative perspective of our lives, and we can be so affected about how we live our lives that it robs our future. Now, I want to finish with this one statement. When we worry, when we entertain and harbor thoughts of fear and discouragement in our minds, when we do that on a continuous basis, we are not only robbing the present of its joys and its blessings, but we are robbing the future of what God has in store for us too in the future. So I pray that I pray that you've received something, and I'm just going to go ahead and let Lilian take over. Thank you.
Wow, Pastor Julius, thank you for such wisdom and
Amen.
such relatable things that you're sharing with us. That is really awesome. I can testify that, I've seen how you do it, especially with your family. I don't know how you manage to do that. I think I saw a picture of you and Jordan learning a new instrument together. Well, you kind of do that every day.
That's a good example.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And I saw that, and just seeing him looking at you and holding on to that trumpet and singing, he watches how you build excellence, and he says, if Dad's doing it, I can work my way through that. So I commend you for the work that you and Julia are also doing in the Palm Beach area, and we appreciate your wisdom. We appreciate your contribution to the community.
Amen. Praise God. Thank you. Thank you.
Amen. So we're down to our last panelist now. And I want to introduce to you another really wonderful friend of mine that I really appreciate, that we've come to just build a wonderful relationship. And that is Reverend Samuel Mwangi. And he is the co-founder of Community Care and Addiction Recovery Services. And he's co-founder along with his wife, Gladys. He's a state licensed Christian outpatient service provider in the state of Pennsylvania. he utilizes a holistic approach that involves working with individuals and families towards, just wholeness. He recognizes that addiction plays itself in different dynamics among family members. With some of us are users, some of us are enablers, others become codependent and rescuers, while others are victims. So his practice aims at treating the whole family. And one of the cool things they really do is they also train churches to minister healing and recovery to their own communities. Pastor Samuel is also a certified clinical supervisor in the state of Pennsylvania. And he's also he's a pastor of a church, Carpenter Community Church, where I've had an opportunity to go to in Pennsylvania. He's a husband to Gladys and a father of 2 amazing adult boys. And they live in Pennsylvania with his family. He's going to speak to us today about some of his experiences, also the impact of really not coping effectively with stresses, especially when people choose to use substances. He'll talk about the impact of substance use on families, on relationships. What do we do? How would people know that a family member is struggling and maybe using? How can we help them find purpose? And maybe just enlighten us a little bit about how that impacts the family. Oh, my video froze there for a while, right?
A little bit.
Okay, so he will say more about himself. Reverend Samuel is going to say a whole lot about some of the things he's doing. I'm going to yield the floor to you to just give us a quick summary of some of the work you're doing.
I want to thank you, Lilian, for creating this platform where we can all come together and we can be able to share some of this information, our experiences and expertise, and hopefully that we will be able to build those that are listening. And I know that this is a very short time, so I am just going to say that hopefully in the near future that we would be able to expand this and be able to give more information and hopefully that those who are seeking for any answers, those who have questions that even outside of this forum, that you might be able to do that, and maybe Lilian can create space where we can be able to answer some of those questions. So again, as Lilian said, whether it is in my pastoral role here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, whether it is in my office where we have a big number of clients, through the court system and children and youth services and from the community and church referrals, and such a needy season that we are living in. One of the things that has happened is that COVID-19, you can imagine, some loved ones may get sick. My wife and I, we actually got sick with this COVID-19, and we were in the house for 14 good days. And so with that, it gave us a really good perspective of what it looks like for a family member to be sick and to be in the house, for a prolonged period of as we take care of each other. We knew that brethren were praying for us, friends across the state, the country, in Kenya, and that was very, very helpful. Nonetheless, we went through that. And so COVID-19, not only does that bring some of those situations where loved ones are sick, coping with physical distancing, or even kids, they're out of school in a very unexpected way. And the parents have to adjust their working schedules to stay at home or to educate them. And some parents at some stage, they feel challenged because of the current educational system, and how do we help our children so that they can continue to perform well and they can continue to fulfill the academic expectations at different grades, and so on and so forth. Daily routines interrupted in a big way. Family milestones, if there was a vacation, it's probably canceled. If there was wedding anniversary and people wanted to travel, that it has been put on hold. And there has been so many things that people have had to adjust, working from home, and even worse, some people actually not being able to work at all. So these are days that we can say, rightfully so, that there is crisis that we are all having to deal with. So for the people that use substance use, there is a saying in this field back about 15, 16 years ago when I got into the field, mental health and substance use, people would ask what came first. Was it mental health or was it substance use? Is it people who were mentally ill and they were seeking to self-medicate? Or did people start using and then it complicated their physical health and their brain chemistry, and eventually they, they became mentally ill? What came first, the chicken or the egg? And I will leave you to be the judge on that one. So at this time, because of the social distancing, most people that have substance abuse issues, they have been cut off from a lot of their mainstream support. And it's very likely that you find there is a lot of relapse going on, relapsing back to using. Many years ago, there used to be many different theories that have been phased out by good research and good study, where people used to think, well, people use drugs and alcohol simply because, they just want to. And it's a matter of strong will. If you have a strong will, you will not be using. Those were some of the theories. Some other people would say, well, if you are so religious, if you are immersed in your religion, that probably would help because you would hold on to your faith very strongly. And so that would never be part of your life. So there was all these kinds of theories. But as years have gone by, a lot of good research have come to help us understand that substance use, it is a mental health brain disorder, which actually has a lot of different complexities that comes along with it. I don't want to get too much into the academic part of it, but I think it's helpful to understand that substance use particularly, people may start even from a social level. People may start from, from a relational level. People may start because it's modern. I remember growing up, most of the wazés in the village back in Kangema, they would sit down, they would drink a beer, they would drink some karobo, they would, all those kinds of things. But then eventually, those that becomes engaged and they start to attempt to use, whether it is here in the United States and whether it's in Kenya, it reaches a time that an individual crosses that threshold where the chemical or the substance of their choice becomes the main stimulant within their brain, which stimulates their brain chemistries and to help them experience some chemicals like dopamines, the good feel chemicals within a human life. I just want to say our practice, it is faith-based, and so I will request for you to excuse me for those of you that probably are not from that perspective, but that's where we come from. I want to say that human beings are created in a very unique way, that we can experience life and joys and excitement and happiness through so many different ways. You go to a wedding, it's an exciting day. You have a birthday, you pass an exam, you graduate, you get a raise, you get a good job, you succeed in business, all those kinds of things. And so there are so many natural ways where our brains are stimulated, and the release of dopamines that says, yay, this is good, this is great, life is going really good. Now, for someone that uses substance, there is an interchange that takes place, and just very briefly, your frontal lobe, which is your thinking and decision-making part of your brain, where those complex decisions are made. And then you have, your temporal lobe, which consists of your emotions and your limbic system and your memory center and all those other parts that deals with emotions. That's where you experience all emotions from. And the interchange that starts to come in your cognitive brain, in your frontal lobe, for somebody that uses, they are faced with all the decisions in life and circumstances like everybody else. A child gets sick, they lose a job, economy is not going well, stocks are down, they lose a home, they are evicted. For them, if a brain has been accustomed and conditioned to that it does not produce the dopamines naturally, because the individual has practiced to ingest and administer substance, chemicals, in order for the brain to be stimulated and feel good, they are most likely to default and fall back to those kinds of practices. And so COVID-19 brings and poses a big challenge to those people that are that use substance, that are in recovery, and they have not only lost that support that they have, but they also may need a lot of coping skills. And depending on where an individual is, whether advanced in their recovery life or whether they are in the very beginning of stage, it is very, very difficult to deal with these things. And so, as a matter of fact, I think some of the things that are becoming helpful is technology, virtual meetings, things like that, and so on and so forth. Not only their support and has been taken away, their health is also at risk. Think about some of the things such as struggles with breathing issues that COVID-19 is bringing with it. Those people who use some chemicals like methamphetamine that also creates issues with breathing. It really can complicate a lot of health situations. The attacks on the lungs by COVID-19, if somebody is smoking tobacco, that problem becomes a complex that if they would get sick, they have much bigger challenge to deal with and to address than somebody who doesn't drink. If somebody is smoking marijuana, somebody who is vaping, all those kinds of things, and it's important to keep that in mind. People that use things like cocaine that would also complicate their respiratory systems and their pulmonary health. And so COVID-19 puts people that are very vulnerable and people that have been accustomed to coping in ways that are not healthy in a much risky place, whereby even health-wise, it's becoming a challenge. Some of the supports, and I know it's been a long time, 25 years since we've been in this small village where we live is not a short time. I'm not all familiar with the support systems that would be found out there in Kenya, but I know that there are some rehabs and some counseling services, not very specific what that would be. But generally, people who attend things like Alcoholics Anonymous or Smart Recovery meetings, Celebrate Recovery, which are faith-based meetings, or even attend church, or even just to be able to gather with a mentor or a sponsor to process and talk about what's going on. COVID-19 has posed a lot of challenges to this particular population. And so we are asking, if you have a member of your family that probably struggle with substance use, this probably can be a very good time to reach out to them, to be able to talk to them, to be able to listen to them. And there may not be a lot of answers that you may have, but at least it helps to identify and to recognize that somebody cares enough. It helps that you might be able to steer their thinking processes in the right direction, to validate and encourage them in some of the good steps that they are taking as they endure and as they go through this process. When you think about substance use, they say that substance use is a family disease. I used to wonder when I first got in the field what that really means. And with the years that I've been in this field, it is so true, because you might have an alcoholic individual. It could be a father, it could be a son, but then the rest of the family, they are all drunk with worry, with anxiety, with the what ifs, with guilt and shame. You are an alcoholic, you're part of our family. This is not the image we want to display in the village, or this is not the image that we really want people to see or know about our family. And so the disease of addiction thrives a lot in secrecy because of shame and guilt and all the other things that come along with it. And so within the family, the dynamic starts to change. There's a lot of dysfunctions. There are some things that they suggest that starts to take place. Some people, they start taking the role of being an enabler. You know, an enabler is an individual who is trying to do the things that are falling apart and that have been left unattended in order for the family units to continue to function. So an enabler will come behind everybody and trying to do and to take on the responsibilities of the rest of the family, and particularly the person who is struggling with substance use. You know, there can be the hero, somebody who wants to really excel and wants to continue to do a lot of great things that helps to maintain the family image. And again, you find whether it is an enabler, whether it is a hero, whether it is a scapegoat, someone who finds themselves not very sure of how to deal with all of the things that are happening within a family when there is addiction or alcoholism or even abuse taking place and all of that, and that their choices starts to be bad. They start to make very poor choices. They could fall. They could fall and become victims of making very poor choices that could lead to a breaking of the law or even many other bad things in that case. Some of the children in the family may just be so threatened and fearful and anxious, and they don't want to get in the way of the person that's using or the family with all the dysfunctions, and they withdraw. And in that withdrawing, you find that some people, they take that role of a lost child or a lost individual. They don't talk much. They just find something that captures them, captivates them, and they engage and involve themselves in whatever they can find for themselves to do. And then you find the person that is actually the addict. And I know that in our country, Kenya, particularly because of the cultural context of most of, at least most of the tribes, if especially the Wazes are sitting down, you know, the older men, and they are either drinking or socially engaging in things like alcohol and all of that. It has had its own good amount of acceptance. The aftermath and the effects of that, while those of us that grew up in that era, I remember my father died when I was 6 years old, and he died at age 53. Fast forward about 6, 7 years ago, I lost my brother from alcoholism at age 53. 5 years after my brother died, then his wife followed because she had all these issues that she developed. There was a lot of health issues that she developed, and being an enabler. And not only that, I look and see some of the dynamics even within our family and so many other families that we treat. And I believe it's not any different, even though a lot of times we don't talk about these things. One of the things in this field that becomes a huge, huge strength is to learn to be vulnerable. And if there is any man out there in Kenya, in fact, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I want to say most of us in Kenya that have grown up in Kenya, there is almost a harsh way of dealing with things. And we have been taught and trained, and it has been modeled for us that you don't say a lot of things, and what happens within families stays within families. But I want to encourage you to become a vulnerable person, first and foremost, in seeking for help if you have any issues. Either issues in your own life, issues in your marriage, issues with your children, do not die in the closet simply because there are issues and you would rather maintain the family image. Come out of that culture and seek for help, be healthy and be well, and you will break a cycle of generations. I wish somebody stood up to it. In my time, I think there would have been a lot of difference in my life and in the lives of many that were growing together with me. Anyhow, how do people know that a family member is using? That depends on different families. It depends on one family to another. A lot of that can be, if it's a child, you may start observing some of the changes in emotions, responses, involvement in family aspects, family come together, family dinners, those kinds of things. But again, you will never be able to know those things unless the dynamics of the family create space for people to be able to come together, for you to notice that there is difference between what was happening and what is happening today. So COVID-19 has forced us to do that, has brought us together. So this is a time we can learn each other, and hopefully by the time we come out of this, we can be able to know when things change, when things are changing. And there's a lot of different things that people can do. I would say if there is severe mental health or somebody has some severity that has developed either in their behavior, in their mental health, in their physical health, seeking for help from a health standpoint, I think it's very helpful. Talk with your doctor, talk with a psychiatrist, talk with a psychologist, talk with a counselor somewhere. It is okay to take medication if you are experiencing some of those things where it is deemed okay for you to be able to take medication to help you. And sometimes it's for a season, and sometimes it's for a longer season. But I want to say there is nothing, you are not crazy, you are not mad just because you're taking meds, you are not completely off the locker, you are not somewhere out there. You are a very real human being living in the real world and experiencing things that a lot of people experience. So for the guys, get another guy and learn to share. I have about 2 men that are very close to me, and particularly one of them, we sit down, not only do we pray together, we talk about our children, we talk about our wives, we talk about our money, we talk about everything from A to Z. We play a lot of pool together, we hang out together, we laugh together, we cry together. If you are a man and you're listening to my voice today, do not waste another time hanging out with 50 people that you cannot openly, honestly, vulnerably open up yourself to. Look for 1 or 2 people that you can share everything and anything with, and people that can really come around you and be supportive to you. It is very, 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 very important. You will learn very soon there is nothing you can say that is probably new on the planet. There is nothing you will say that is new on the planet. We've heard it all. And so whatever you might be saying, it's going to be similar to something that somebody else has already heard. And so we need to break that culture of secrecy and privacy and isolation. And I don't want anybody to know anything. Among us, the Kikuyus, pardon me for that. The ladies, when you hear mutumia, mutumia is a mutumia because they can negotumeria, they can tumia, they can keep quiet, they can seal their lips, and they don't have to talk a lot. And those were some of the cultures back in the day. But we are living in 2020 where we have to learn those things that will work for us now and are healthy and are going to help us to proceed on. And even as I finish here, some of the resources out there, and again, I apologize, I'm not able to speak much into the resources that you may need if you're living in Kenya today. Those of us that are living within the United States, depending on what state you're in, there is always enough resources for either rehabs, for outpatient services and all of that. And so it is very, very important that if you're facing any of those challenges, in particular substance use, you can look on the SAMHSA website, and that is SAMHSA, SAMHSA website, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. And Lilian would be able to post that number later in this recording. And you can call and they can be able to direct you in your state, the help you need, the state resources, the county resources. There's a lot of help out there that you would be able to access. And I know I don't have a lot of time and I don't want to go on too much. Someone had asked, how can a family member cope with dysfunctions related to substance use? I want to say, seek for help. And help is not just needed for the son that's smoking weed, for the husband that's drinking, for the daughter that's probably using something. Help is needed for the whole family so that you can be well and you learn how to, in a healthy way, to come alongside and support the individual that is using. Otherwise, you may be diving into the into all the problems that are coming with a user, and then you're not a lifesaver, and you cannot jump in the water to save someone unless you have been trained and you know how to save lives. You need to learn in order to be able to become a better support. So I know there might be a lot of questions, but we will be looking out for those. And again, Dr. Lilian, thanks for having me. And I'd like to pass on the meeting back to you.
Wow, wow, wow. Pastor Samuel, you know, I usually we share the pulpit when we're preaching, and I hadn't tapped into this resource with the substance abuse, counseling and all that amazing work. It's so nice to just be with, not just you, with Pastor Julius and Pastor Mueni and Pastor John, to just see a different side of all of you, because we do different things together. And just to see that facet of you, I want to say that there's such a wealth of resources among us that I think we can maximize and be our brother's keeper, be our sister's keeper. There's just so many things that we need. There is a mental health crisis in our community. And I have decided I am not going to be silent anymore. And I am persuaded that all of you got into this forum, this webinar today, because you decided I can't be silent anymore. I don't think anybody came in here because you were just curious about, let's see what this African people have to say. You can think of somebody right now who's impacted by a mental health condition. Now, whether you identify it as a mental health issue or not, but it's present. Somebody who has a dysfunctional relationship, somebody who's enabling another person in one way or another, somebody who does not know how to communicate, somebody who's challenged by the stressors, maybe even within the family. We didn't even, last webinar, we barely touched on working with raising children who have special needs or developmental disabilities or limitations. We didn't even touch on that. So you know somebody somewhere who has a lot of hiccups, or somebody, we talked about grief today, that have had a loss, and you realize they did not develop a new normal in the absence of this person, and they're not functioning well. You probably know somebody who's drinking a little bit too much than you think they should, or somebody who stopped showing up at your social gatherings, and we are all just saying, she's fine. But deep down, you know, there's something wrong there. Sometimes it takes a phone call to ask somebody, tell them, I'm here. Do you want to talk? There are a lot of people that I just send them a text message and tell them, if you ever need to talk, I'm here. And then I leave it to them. I empower them to reach out again. Saving a life sometimes just means reaching out and handing a line and saying, if you ever need me, I'm here. There is a crisis among us, diasporians, and I know that in Kenya, you're also dealing with a lot of challenges that are hindering our functioning, and the generation behind us cannot propagate the same issues we have dealt with. Let's equip them so that they can seek help, so that they can reach out for help. And I have had a lot of questions about how do we manage the issues that come up with our young adults and our teenagers. I know those of us in the diaspora, if you're going to be successful and raise your kids in a healthy environment, you have to change your mindset. And I always like to say, and I get in trouble with parents when I say, most of us did not sit down with our children before we got on the plane to come to the US to ask them, so what do you think? Should we go? Should we not? And so we have to come back and say, all right, so we're here and we have these cultures. How do we navigate that in a healthy way? Even those of us in Kenya, we gotta get out of our bubble, the village bubble, and say that, take some courage and step out and say, I'm going to go shoot some pool with my son. I'm going to go and do manicures with my daughter. You know, we're going to go jogging with my daughter, you know, whatever it is that will help the family be healthy. Now, we're going to, there's a lot of questions that you all asked, and we're going to revisit those. We're going to have more webinars like this so that we can address some of those questions. If we didn't get to your question today, it's because we do not have enough time to do that, but I will certainly be sending you an email to let you know when we'll have our next one. I want to encourage providers. If there are any mental health providers on this line today, we need you. We need you. I know a lot of people here in the US, people of African descent, or should I say continental Africans, they are constantly asking, how can I see somebody who looks like me? Somebody who understands where I'm coming from, who understands, I don't know where you all are. Can you reach out to me and let me know? And I want to also invite the providers in Kenya or somewhere else in the, you know, in the continent. I want to build a network of providers, because right now there were questions that were asked about rehabs in Kenya for substance use. Some of us have been in this country for 25 years. So unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the resources at home, and I have this space, but so I need providers who know where those resources are to come and provide that. So if you know some providers, especially those of you in Kenya, and you know where they are, just hit me, drop me an email and let me know, oh, there's this person who does this. I'll begin that relationship with them. Then we can find a place when you guys send me questions and say, how do I help so-and-so? I'll be like, oh yeah, there's this provider in this and this a place. Same with those of us here in the US. So we can do that. We have to be our brother's keeper. We have to be our sister's keeper. There's a lot of resources. We just have to have a way of accessing them and sending people to those relevant places. Now, there is, let me see if I can share this. There is a resource that Pastor Mueni shared with me, if I can find it. Can you all see that? So those are, if you need to, you can call 1199 for free counseling or any necessary referral and linkage to social support. You can do this on the Kenyan side. And I know this is not the only resource. There are lots of resources that I'm going to see if I can compile and share those with you. I know there's great work going on in Kenya right now, and I want us to access that. For those of us here in the US, let me see if I can find a slide that I had. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, they're available 24/7. You can call them, no questions asked, and they'll be able to help you and talk to you. If you prefer to text, you can also text home to that number there. Domestic violence hotline. And I like the website because sometimes somebody is in a situation where you cannot talk because maybe the person who's the abuser is in the room. You don't want them to hear you speak. If you go to the hotline, you can also access them. and somebody will chat with you anonymously, they will not be able to be traced. I will email all this information and lots of other information that we can use. I will email the PowerPoints and the slides and everything from our presenters today, so you can have access to that. I want to appreciate every one of you for taking time to call. This says you care. You care about yourself. And don't go down silently, like our Reverend Samuel said. Seek help. Find a buddy. Find an accountability buddy. Sometimes invade somebody's space and let them know I care. Because sometimes, especially people who are contemplating suicide, they need somebody to reach out to them and tell them, I'm here, I care. I know in the US, we do a lot of, individual space, just leave me alone, my space. Oh no, get in their business sometimes and just let them know I'm here. A text message has talked people off the cliff. A text message has made somebody rethink their plan. If you don't know how to do it, I have tons of resources to share with you to help you learn the language to do that. And with that, I want to say thank you, everybody. We'll stay in touch concerning the next webinar. Take care of yourselves, continue to social distance, not to socially isolate. Thank you, everybody. God bless you.